When Elon Musk's young son stood up during a Good Friday service, no one expected what came next. In just 7 words, he silenced an entire church and moved millions to tears. What did he say that left even his father speechless? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The morning sun cast a soft, golden light over Grace Community Church. It was Good Friday, and a quiet sense of reverence filled the air. Parents led their young children up the wide stone steps, colorful paper flowers clutched tightly in small hands. Inside, the scent of fresh lilies mingled with the warmth of old wood and polished pews. Pastor James, adjusting his tie, exchanged a few final words with Sarah, the children's service coordinator, who was setting up the small wooden cross at the front of the sanctuary. Children's laughter echoed gently through the large room as families found their seats. The buzz of conversation was light, cheerful, but tinged with something deeper, an awareness of the solemn story they were here to remember. Volunteers moved quietly between rows, passing out small programs and smiling at the little ones who fidgeted with excitement. Suddenly, a ripple of quiet surprise spread through the congregation. Elon Musk, dressed in jeans and a simple jacket, entered the back of the sanctuary, his young son X walking closely beside him. They slipped into a pew near the back, trying to remain unobtrusive, but heads turned nonetheless. X's wide eyes darted around the room, soaking in every detail. The stained glass windows shimmering with morning light, the massive wooden cross at the front, the large painting of Jesus carrying the cross. He sat very still, clutching a small program in his hands, his gaze shifting from the pulpit to the figures around him. It wasn't restlessness that filled him. It was something more profound: curiosity, wonder, a thirst for understanding. Pastor James caught a glimpse of the boy's focused expression and exchanged a knowing glance with Sarah. Today, something special was about to unfold, though no one could yet imagine just how deeply it would touch them all. Sarah stood at the front of the sanctuary, smiling warmly as she addressed the children gathered before her. She spoke in gentle, simple words explaining the meaning of Good Friday, that even though it was a sad day when Jesus died, it was called good because of the love and sacrifice behind it. The children listened, some fidgeting quietly, others clutching their paper flowers. Near the back, X sat perfectly still, his wide eyes locked onto Sarah. He leaned toward Elon, whispering questions that made his father nod thoughtfully and answer in hushed tones. Elon's expression was one of patience, but also deep focus, aware that something significant was stirring in his son's mind. Without warning, X raised his small hand into the air. Sarah paused, a bit surprised, but nodded to him warmly. Standing up slightly on the pew to be seen, X spoke in a clear, innocent voice that carried through the church. If Jesus knew he was going to die, why didn't he just run away? The sanctuary fell into a heavy silence. Adults shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some parents exchanged glances, sensing that something far deeper than a children's service was beginning to unfold before their eyes. For Elon Musk, parenting had never been about giving easy answers. From the time X could form sentences, Elon had encouraged him to ask hard questions, the kinds that adults often sidestep. Around their home, discussions about science, technology, philosophy, and even faith were as common as conversations about homework or bedtime stories. Elon wanted his son to grow up thinking deeply, not just about how things worked, but why they mattered. Lately, X's questions had shifted. As Easter approached, he seemed increasingly fascinated by the stories of Jesus, by talk of life, death, and something called resurrection. He had asked his father why people celebrated someone dying. He had asked why sadness and joy were sometimes mixed together. Elon, for all his brilliance in solving technical problems, found these questions harder to answer. He didn't want to impose his own complicated beliefs on X. Elon's relationship with faith was a complex one, part skepticism, part wonder, and so when X had asked to learn more about Easter, Elon had made a simple decision. He would take his son to a church service and let him hear the story for himself, straight from those who believed in it deeply. For Elon, it wasn't just about satisfying X's curiosity. It was also an unspoken journey for himself, a way to confront questions that even science could not fully answer. Sitting quietly beside his son now, watching him absorb every word with wide, wondering eyes, Elon felt the weight of those questions settle heavier on his own heart. What was sacrifice? What was love at its fullest? And what did it mean to truly believe in something unseen? He had brought X here to find answers. He hadn't expected that in doing so, he might begin searching for some of his own. Sarah paused for a moment, the weight of X's question settling over the church like a soft blanket. She walked slowly down the aisle, kneeling gently near where he sat, so their eyes could meet without the towering distance of adulthood. The congregation watched in respectful silence, the innocence and earnestness of the moment pulling at their hearts. "That's a very good question, X," Sarah said, her voice warm but steady. Jesus could have chosen to run away. He had the power to save himself, but he didn't. He stayed because his love for us was bigger than his fear of pain. He wanted to show the world that real love sometimes means doing something very hard, even when it hurts. X frowned thoughtfully, swinging his feet where they barely touched the floor. After a moment, he looked up again, his small face lighting with an idea. "Like, when I give my brother my favorite toy, even when I really, really want it for myself?" A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the pews. Parents exchanged knowing glances, touched by the sweet, simple comparison. Elon gave a small smile, resting his hand lightly on X's back, proud of his son's ability to connect big truths to his little life. Sarah nodded, smiling. "Yes, X, a little like that. Giving something up for someone else because you love them very much. That's what Jesus did for all of us." For a moment, X seemed satisfied. He leaned back against the pew, fiddling with the hem of his sleeve. Sarah turned to continue with the lesson, but just as she took a breath to speak, X's hand shot up again, his curiosity burning too brightly to wait. "Why didn't Jesus just tell people he loved them instead of dying?" he asked, his voice ringing clear through the quiet sanctuary. The question hung in the air. Parents straightened in their seats. Even Pastor James, standing at the side, leaned forward slightly. It was a simple question, but one that carried layers of meaning, one that many adults had struggled with, but few had dared to voice so plainly. Sarah let the silence stretch a beat longer, recognizing the depth behind the innocent words. Slowly, she moved back toward X, her eyes kind but serious. "Sometimes," she said softly, "words aren't enough. Sometimes, to show how much you love someone, you have to act. Jesus didn't just want to say he loved us, he wanted to show it with everything he had." X's brow furrowed, the gears clearly turning in his young mind. He pressed his palms together tightly, as if trying to squeeze the thoughts into place. "So, dying was his way of showing love?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Sarah nodded. "The biggest way?" The adults in the room sat motionless, as if breathing too loudly would break the fragile, sacred feeling that had descended over the church. Even the usual shifting and fidgeting of children was absent. Every eye was on the small boy and the gentle teacher. Elon watched his son intently, a strange ache stirring in his chest. X wasn't just asking about theology. He was reaching, searching for understanding about sacrifice, about love, about the unseen threads that tied all people together. And somehow, through the clear, piercing questions of a child, even Elon felt himself pulled into the mystery. At that moment, it was no longer just a children's service. It was something more. Sarah took a breath, sensing the shift in the room. The children were no longer just an audience to a story. They were being drawn into it. She glanced around, seeing the attentive faces of parents and volunteers, all leaning in as if afraid to miss a word. Jesus showed his love through sacrifice, Sarah continued gently, and he also showed forgiveness. Even when people were being cruel to him, even as he was hurting, he prayed, asking God to forgive them. X, still deep in thought, looked up at Sarah, his expression more serious than before. He fidgeted with the sleeve of his shirt, the way children often do when they're trying to process something too big for words. His voice, when it came, was soft, but carried through the church with startling clarity. Did Jesus' mom cry? The question sliced through the room. A quiet gasp rose from somewhere in the back. Sarah, caught off guard for a second, hesitated. Before she could find her words, Elon leaned closer to his son and answered, his voice low and steady. Yes, X. Elon said. His mother cried. A lot. The weight of those few simple words hung in the air, pressing against every heart in the room. Parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few instinctively tightened their arms around their children. It was no longer a neat Bible story. It had become something living and raw. A real moment of grief and love echoed through the centuries and into this quiet church today. X stared down at his small hands resting in his lap, his fingers curled into fists. After a long pause, he whispered, "My mom would cry too if something bad happened to me." The pure honesty of the statement cracked the surface of the congregation's composure. Several adults wiped their eyes quietly. Even Pastor James, a seasoned man used to leading through the hardest moments of life, found himself blinking back emotion. Sarah knelt again, lowering herself to X's level. "That's right, X," she said tenderly. "When you love someone deeply, their pain becomes your pain too. That's how Mary felt. That's how all of Jesus's friends felt. They didn't just lose a leader, they lost someone they loved." X nodded solemnly, his small frame seeming to carry a weight far bigger than his years. He leaned slightly against his father, seeking comfort without even realizing it. Elon placed a steady hand on his back, drawing him close without saying a word. The simple, instinctive gesture said everything. In that quiet, something profound unfolded. The Good Friday story wasn't being taught to the children. It was being shared with them, and through them, with the adults too. It wasn't history or theology. It was love. It was loss. It was the aching hope that maybe pain wasn't the end of the story. The stained glass windows glowed faintly as clouds shifted outside. Light and shadow danced across the pews, flickering like the emotions rippling through the hearts of everyone present. Sarah, steadying her voice, continued softly. "And that's why Easter is so important," she said. "Because it shows us that even when the worst thing happens, even when we lose someone we love, there is still hope. There is still love that never dies." X's eyes shone, reflecting not just the colorful light, but the understanding that had taken root inside him. Around the church, a reverent silence remained. No one stirred. No one dared break the moment. The boys' questions had taken them deeper than any sermon could. From sacrifice to forgiveness, from death to love, the story had become real. It had become theirs, and they would never forget it. Pastor James stepped forward once again, his voice gentle but firm, calling the children to the front. It was time for the symbolic moment of the service, the placing of paper flowers at the foot of the cross. Each flower represented gratitude, a small offering of thanks for the sacrifice they had just learned about. Sarah distributed the colorful paper flowers one by one, red, yellow, blue, each child taking theirs with tiny hands and shy smiles. Some walked forward eagerly, while others hesitated before making their way toward the large wooden cross standing tall at the front of the church. X sat frozen in the pew, clutching his red flower tightly in his hand. His knuckles whitened around the stem as he stared at the cross. Elon leaned down, whispering something encouraging in his ear. X didn't respond immediately. He simply stared, his young face full of serious thought. Finally, with a small, determined breath, X slid out of the pew. His small footsteps echoed slightly as he walked alone down the center aisle, the paper flower trembling slightly in his grasp. Every eye in the sanctuary followed him. Even the normally fidgety children stilled, sensing something important was unfolding. As X reached the cross, he looked up at it for a long moment. His tiny form seemed even smaller next to the heavy wooden beams. Sarah stepped forward, ready to assist him if needed, but something about the look on his face made her stop in her tracks. Instead of simply laying the flower down like the others, X turned slowly to face the congregation. He clutched the flower against his chest, his wide eyes scanning the rows of adults and children. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, with a voice clear and steady beyond his years, X spoke, "So we could live." The words, simple yet searing, filled the church. They landed with a weight far beyond their length. A collective stillness swept the room, as if time itself paused. Even the smallest children sensed it. Parents lowered their phones, tears already brimming in their eyes. Some adults simply closed their eyes, the raw truth of the moment too much to bear all at once. Sarah brought her hand to her heart, overwhelmed by the purity and depth of the boy's words. Pastor James blinked rapidly, visibly moved but struggling to compose himself. Elon sat frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the pew. His son's words hung in the air, heavier than any scientific breakthrough, any technological achievement. It was not just a statement of fact, it was a statement of faith, spoken without artifice, without doubt, a truth distilled to its purest form. As the silence deepened, soft sounds of weeping could be heard. A woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. A man near the aisle bowed his head, overcome. It wasn't the eloquence of a trained speaker that moved them. It was the innocence, the honesty, the clear window into a faith that many had complicated, rationalized, or forgotten. X, unaware of the depth of the impact he had just made, turned back to the cross and gently placed his flower at its base. He stood there for a moment, looking up one last time, before quietly making his way back to his father. Elon reached out and pulled him close, resting his hand lightly on his son's shoulder. No words passed between them, but the bond between them was stronger than ever, sealed by a moment neither would ever forget. Around them, the congregation remained still, reverent. No announcements were made, no music started. For a few sacred minutes, they simply sat together in the silence, breathing in the wonder of what they had just witnessed. It wasn't the voice of a preacher that had changed the atmosphere. It wasn't a grand production or a planned event. It was the simple, unvarnished truth, spoken from the heart of a child, and it had reached them all. The silence that followed X's words lingered like a sacred hush, so thick it seemed even the walls were holding their breath. Sarah stood near the front, her mouth slightly open, searching for words that refused to come. Beside her, Pastor James shifted, visibly moved, blinking hard against the emotions rising inside him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Pastor James stepped forward. His voice, when he found it, was low but steady. "Out of the mouths of babes," he said, quoting the familiar scripture, his gaze sweeping across the room. Sometimes the purest truths come from the smallest voices. The congregation stirred, some nodding, others still wiping at their eyes. The moment had broken something loose in the hearts of many, something they hadn't even realized had hardened. The innocence of a child had pierced where sermons and studies often could not. As the final prayer was offered and the service concluded, people didn't rush to leave. Instead, small groups formed spontaneously in the pews and along the aisles. Strangers who had attended the same church for years without speaking now found themselves deep in conversation. "Did you hear what he said?" one elderly woman whispered to a young mother nearby. "Captured it better than any of us could," the mother replied softly, bouncing her toddler on her hip. Conversations swirled around faith, sacrifice, and the forgotten simplicity of belief. Parents crouched down to explain to their own children why that little boy's words had moved so many. Teens looked thoughtful, their usual distractions set aside. Even hardened skeptics, who had come out of habit or obligation, found themselves reflecting on something deeper. Meanwhile, outside the church, the first murmurs had already made their way onto social media. A few discreetly taken posts described the moment in tender, respectful terms. Today at Grace Community Church, a 5-year-old boy captured the meaning of Good Friday in 7 words. "He died so we could live. I'll never forget it. A child reminded me today why I first believed. Pure faith, no walls, no pride, just love." Within hours, the story spread beyond the church walls. Local news outlets picked it up, writing short pieces about the unexpected moment of profound simplicity. They were careful to protect X's identity, referring only to the young son of a well-known visitor who had spoken words that left a church in awe. But those who had been there didn't need names. They carried the memory home with them, tucked into their hearts like a sacred keepsake. Sarah, sitting quietly after the service, thought back to X standing before the cross, his small voice so clear, so sure. She realized that for all the lessons they tried to teach children about faith, it was often the children who taught the greatest lessons in return. Pastor James, standing near the door and shaking hands, caught Elon's eye as he and X prepared to leave. With a silent nod, they shared a moment of mutual understanding. No matter what the world thought about fame, power, or success, today had been about something infinitely bigger. It had been about a child, a cross, and a truth too powerful to be forgotten. The car ride home was unusually quiet. Elon gripped the steering wheel with one hand, the other resting lightly on his knee. X sat in the passenger seat, his small legs swinging back and forth, his hands cradling the folded program from the Good Friday service. The city moved past them in soft blurs of light, but Elon's mind wasn't on the road. It was still back at the church, replaying the moment his son had stood before a room full of people and spoken words that felt older than time. After a while, X broke the silence. "Dad," he said, tilting his head curiously, "why were people looking at me like that?" Elon glanced over, catching his son's reflection in the rearview mirror. He thought for a moment before answering. "Because sometimes," he said slowly, "children see things more clearly than adults do." X considered that, then shrugged with the unaffected honesty that only a child could possess. "It's not hard," he said simply. "Jesus died so we could live." When Elon's throat tightened unexpectedly. The purity of the statement, the lack of complication or doubt, hit harder than any sermon ever could. In all his years of searching, questioning, building, and striving, he had often found life tangled in complexity. But sitting next to him was a little boy who understood a profound truth without needing to dissect it. Love, sacrifice, hope. They weren't ideas to be engineered or negotiated. They were gifts, given freely, meant to be accepted with a heart wide open. As they continued down the road, Elon reached over and gently squeezed his son's hand. X squeezed back without hesitation. And for the first time in a long while, Elon allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some of life's biggest answers were also its simplest. As the day drew to a quiet close, Elon and X found themselves standing once more at the entrance of the church. The late afternoon sun poured through a towering stained glass window depicting the resurrection, casting brilliant colors across the floor. X gazed up at it, his small hand slipping into his father's without a word. Elon followed his son's gaze, feeling the deep weight of what they had both experienced. In that moment, under the glow of sacred light, the world seemed less complicated, and faith felt as close as the hand he held. A gentle voice echoed over the scene. Sometimes, the deepest truths are spoken by the smallest voices. If this inspiring story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe for more journeys of faith, hope, and the simple courage to believe in goodness again. Together, let's rediscover the beauty found in the purest acts of love.